Good morning. You're listening to Retake Our Democracy, a weekly 30-minute radio show that airs at 8:30 a.m. every Saturday morning on KSFR 101.1, your Santa Fe public radio station. And I'm Paul Gibson, the host of Retake Our Democracy. Today, I'll be offering one of my periodic solo shows, as I have a good deal to share today. But before I get started, I just want to remind our listeners that last week I spoke with Jeff Haas. He's the author of The Assassination of Fred Hampton and a lifetime advocate, civil rights advocate, civil rights attorney. It was a really, really good show. We spoke for almost an hour. I'm going to post that today in the Saturday Post, along with a recording of this show. But I really highly recommend it. It's inspiring to see somebody who's just done the work from the time he was about 24, 25 until today at 77, I believe, 78. Ironically, the week before, I had Marielle Nanasi, Jeff's wife, on. She's the director of New Energy Economy and one of our strongest allies, and they're some of our best friends. And ironically, that's the first time I've ever had a husband and wife on shows back to back. And then the last Saturday night, they came to our house for dinner to celebrate my 70th birthday. Which was last Saturday. And that's going to be sort of the point of departure for today's show, because there's a way in which turning 70 is one of those milestone birthdays that you can't ignore. It sort of sharpens the mind in some ways. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about some of those lessons and how they apply to Retake Our Democracy and to me personally, and to Roxanne and I. So in any case, we'll get to that in just a minute, but if you're driving around today and don't catch all of today's show, you can always go to retakeourdemocracy.org and click on the Actions and Events menu, and you'll quickly see in the pull down Retake Conversations, and all the recordings are hosted there. You can go back in time and look at interviews with Dar Jamal, with Brian Egoff, with Bill Ayers and Bernadette Dorn, all kinds of people who have played important roles in political life in New Mexico and across the country. So check it out. But before we get started, I also want to acknowledge that the show is being recorded on stolen Tewa land. And I want to thank the Tewa people and all Indigenous people for their stewardship of the land and their commitment to a different kind of relationship with non-human entities. I'll be talking a little bit about my reading of Nick Estes' book and viewing the Red Nation's recent panel discussion on Zoom, which was just extraordinarily good. And I'm trying to find a way to get a recording of it because I want to share it with everyone. It's just important to acknowledge the unique relationship that the Indigenous people had with the earth, and to thank them for it, because we really have to learn from them. And then finally, I just want to remind you, if you listen to the show every week, you'll know this, but Retake Our Democracy is launching a 501c3 that's going to be tax deductible. It's going to be called Rethink Our Democracy. And we now have a menu bar on the Retake Our Democracy website. So if you go to retakeourdemocracy.org and look in the menu bar, you'll see Rethink, and click on that, and you can get a good summary of our scope of work, our purpose, the kinds of needs and challenges we identified as being a rationale for going in this direction. And today I'm going to talk quite a bit about that, but in a kind of real personal context. So buckle up, pour yourself some coffee, and let's let's get started. Before I do, though, I just do want to mention that the formation of Rethink is going to be a highly collaborative process, and it could involve you. We have about 25 or 30 people who have articulated an interest in playing roles in the emerging organization. And so if you want to find out more about that, we have huddles twice a month. It's sort of taking off on the legislative huddles that we did during the legislative session. And so this is a good way to find out more about what we're doing, about what we propose, and how you can get involved. So the next huddle is on May 12th, and that's at 6 p.m. and it's done by Zoom. And information about Rethink and that Zoom can be found at the Rethink page on rethinkourdemocracy.org. So let's get started. I'm a little anxious about this. I'm usually pretty comfortable about doing shows and having conversations and making speeches and things like this, but this is personal and it's also uncharted. I do have some things I've written down that I want to say, but I have no idea if this is going to fill 30 minutes or if it's going to fill an hour. But it's not going to fill anything if I don't get started. So let's go. Milestone birthdays have a way of crystallizing the mind, really focusing it. An old friend of mine, the late Bob Bennett, had an expression where he said, nothing focuses the mind than a set date with the firing squad. And, you know, I don't quite have a set date with the firing squad, but there's something about having a 70th birthday. You can't help but recognize that you don't have that many more milestone birthdays left. You know, maybe one or two. You have two, that's 80 and 90. I don't want to say I'm living on borrowed time, but I do want to say that the birthday really caused some focus on, you know, what am I doing? What are we doing? You know, Roxanne are sort of joined at the hip in so many ways, whether it's about the garden that is largely her responsibility, and I just tag along and do what I'm told to help, and should do way more. And then with Retake, I sort of take the lead on that, but Lord knows, could not even begin to do it without her putting on the brakes every once in a while and putting on the gas and refocusing and keeping me from making mistakes. So that's a partnership. And so she's not here today. She's off in California in Sacramento with her daughter. So I'm going to be speaking about Rethink as if it's my project, but it's really not. It's our project. So we started by just saying that you know, the 70th birthday was a milestone and it causes you to really rethink things. Rethink. Rethink your life and rethink our democracy. And so one of the things that a number of factors coalesced around this week to really provide the space and the opportunity to really allow some of the thinking that goes into thinking about what you want to do with the rest of your life and what we want to do with the rest of our lives is a number of factors coalesce to make that easier or almost unavoidable. And the first was the birthday itself and the extraordinary gift that Roxanne gave me for my birthday. I don't know how she did this. She assembled a 46-page book that was 100% made up of comments from people I've known since elementary school and up through people I've worked with here in New Mexico. And each one kind of took a different approach. Some of them were really funny and taking shots at me, especially my friends from high school. And some of them were very appreciative and talking about what Roxanne and I have done with our retirement time. and it was very moving. Those of you who've watched Retake or listened to Retake know that I'm prone to losing it once in a while, and I don't think I really will this time, but it was powerful, and it really caused me to think about the relationships I've had over my lifetime and how some of them have been ignored. Some of the people who made comments on this I haven't spoken with in 10 years since the last high school reunion. And it was powerful. It was powerful, but it caused me to think about what the trajectory of my life has been to getting to this point, and what it could be going forward. And so that was one of those factors that coalesced to make reflections really important this week. The other was that Roxanne is not here. She left a day after my birthday, 2 days after, and flew to Sacramento. Yay, she could fly. Unbelievable. Although she did say that she was packed in like sardines on the flight from here to Sacramento. And so she's been gone. And so the 24 hours of every day have been for me to organize completely and prioritize completely, and with nobody to talk to except my cat, our cat. And he's not very responsive. So a lot of time for thinking. And then the other factor is that I have tried to reduce, and I've been actually pretty successful at this, reduce the time I've been devoting to blogs to free up more time to advance the work on Rethink Our Democracy. But at the same time, this week, it's been spending the process of thinking about what we want to do with Rethink Our Democracy is, in fact, thinking about a large part of what I want to do with the rest of my life, what Roxanne signs up for as well. And, all of this will be, we've been talking about it a bit on the phone, but, all of this will be stuff that we will probably go through some kind of retreat kind of effort once I've gotten down on paper the bones of what we want to do. And what I'm getting down on paper is emerging from those conversations with Roxanne and with our board. So taken together, hitting 70, Roxanne away until later today, yay, and more time to spend reading and in reflection conspired to bring about a lot of thoughts about what the hell do I want to do the rest of my life? And more importantly, what am I going to do with my time and myself to discipline me, to see that the aspirations that kind of emerge from this thinking are things that are translated into goals that are actually completed. They're long-term goals, but they're completed with the thought that the timeline is short. And even before I'd begun thinking about this in the context of turning 70, Roxanne and I had talked about it a good deal in terms of what we want to do with the rest of our lives. And, while some of that has to do with retake or rethink, a good deal of it has to do with things utterly devoid from that, and wanting to carve out more time for those things, because frankly, to a greater degree for me, doing the retake work kind of squeezes everything out of the 24-hour day that we have. And so some of the personal things I want to do is to just devote more time to helping Roxanne in her garden. We have 6 raised beds, half a dozen barrels, large barrels, lots of planting areas, and we raise vegetables. In some of the planting areas, we share them with the rabbits reluctantly, but they were here first. And taking after our reading and my reading of Red Nation and Nick Estes's book, Our History is the Future, developed quite a profound respect for the difference in how Indigenous people relate to non-human beings and entities. In any case, spending more time in the garden, but also spending more time with our family and kids that are dispersed throughout the country. During COVID, it made that almost impossible. It was like Zoom relationships. And yet, now that that's opening up and we have a grandchild that Roxanne still has not seen, um, it's time to carve out the time to spend with those family and good friends. We have friends who are also dispersed throughout the country who kind of went from the Bay Area and went nationwide. And reconnecting with them is not as easy during COVID either, but it's important. It's sort of our chosen family, if you will. And then just traveling a bit. I mean, something we've wanted to do. We like to do it. And I think it broadens your horizons. We learned a good deal from our trip around the United States in our car, 10,000 miles, visiting with activists in different parts of the country, but also, visiting with friends and family across the country as well. And then something, I was a graduate student. I got my master's degree in English literature, and there was a time when I'd read 3 or 4 novels a week. And now if I get 3 or 4 novels read in a year, I'm doing very well. And I intentionally pick short novels so that I can say, oh, all right, I got through it. And that's something that I want to do. And then another is completing a cookbook. I've been working on this cookbook for years, and it's called Pablito Riffs. And Pablito is a name that was given to me by an Ecuadorian, a little probably 4-year-old Ecuadorian, maybe 3 years old, who just started calling me Pablito. And Lord knows why, because I'm 6'4", and the suffix of ito is small Paul. So, and she was like, didn't come up to my knees. So I'm not quite sure where she came up with it, but it has stuck with our family. And so that cookbook is something I've been working on, and I want to finish it because I want to leave it for my kids who like the way Roxanne and I cook. And it's a legacy thing. And part of the 70 thinking is a legacy thing, And then one last mundane thing that I think everybody has on their checklist and never gets to, and that's to finally clean out the garage. We brought a garage to New Mexico thinking we didn't have time to, sift through it and make it a manageable move. And now we've got even more. And that's something we'd like to address. So indeed, I got to check here and make sure I got the time right. 18 minutes, I got to move. So I've spent a fair amount of time these past weeks figuring out how do we make this rethink move forward and yet find time to spend on the things that we actually also want to get done with our lives. And it amounts to almost a kind of New Year's resolution. You go through New Year's resolutions all the time, every year. And by February, you're going like, where did I put that list? I know I was going to work out more and eat less meat, but I think I had some other specific things on there, and then, it's gone. Well, this kind of milestone, it's not okay for it to be gone. I want this to have some tenure in terms of refocusing and restructuring our lives. Roxanne also has, I talked about some of the things that are my personal aspirations. I mentioned earlier Roxanne's gardening, and but she's also had artistic aspirations and is indeed quite a good writer. And so she's got 2 novels that are partially completed. One, I think, about halfway completed, and a collection of short stories. She's always threatening to return to playing piano regularly, and has said she wants to learn to play guitar, take another class in watercolors, and start doing more of that. But all of these things take time, and Roxanne has a voracious aspirations and curiosity about exploring her artistic side, but that is her story, and that's for her to tell. But it's just these are the things that I've been thinking about. How do we carve out more so that we do some of these things that have been on our long-term list and get them onto our short-term list without neglecting our commitment to getting Rethink off the ground? So we've been thinking about these things for a while now, and we do have a strong desire to sustain what we do through Rethink. The thought of us suddenly not being able to do this anymore, we don't know how long we all have. I mean, despite the 70, my brother died at 17. We're given a certain amount of time, but we don't know what it is. And we've started something here that people in New Mexico seem to appreciate and value. And so it's important for us to find a way to sustain that. But the same act of sustaining it would be a way in which we can reduce the number of hours we put in, and have staff who are doing some of the things that we do. That will meet two goals. It'll help us clear our brains and cobwebs from doing the details of the work, to think about vision and to think about long-term aspirations for the organization, but also to help us balance our lives a little bit. And so that's part of what we want to do. But the other thing we want to do with this, and it's the thing we've never had time to do because we're racing to get the next thing done, is to start to take deeper dives into issues and formulate relationships with people that are necessary in order to be effective. It causes me to think back on something that Mark Diaz Truman told Roxanne and I. He's a organizer, and he coached us when we were first getting started, and he emphasized the importance of forming relationships with people. And so, and he said, you don't organize a movement or anything else via email and social media. You do it with one-on-one conversations, and you build relationships, and you build trust, and you build alliances. And then people will do things with you and for you. And so that was a key lesson, and it's really been kind of brought home this past week, because while Roxanne's been gone, I've conducted 15 interviews with legislators, and some of them went for 2 hours. All of them went for at least 45 minutes to an hour. And aside from just learning, a lot more about what goes on behind the scenes in the legislature and what is involved in being more effective advocates, we formed, it was the beginning of relationships with legislators. I spoke with Patty Lundstrom for an hour, and it's no secret that I've been critical of her in the past, and yet she was willing to help me understand some things that I need to understand about the budget process, and she was very helpful. And her commitment to the state was very clear. We don't see fiscal things the same way. She's much more conservative than I am, but there's absolutely no question about her commitment to the state of New Mexico and her skills. She's smart. She knows the budget process. I'm meandering. I do want to get back to what the thoughts are about moving Rethink forward. I mentioned that we wanted to go deeper, and I mentioned also that the work the thinking I've been doing was informed by a book by Nick Estes that I just finished, Our History is the Future. And it was also informed by a great video webinar that was conducted by Red Nation, and about 5 advocates, all female advocates except for Nick Estes. It's been interesting, like one of the things that happened as a result of that, I'm supposed to be focusing Rethink on 5 priority issues. And the Red Nation was not one of them. And yet I'm not now being drawn. I've got to write about this in the blog. And the same thing happened with just last week, all the writing about sustainable agriculture. 3 articles came through, read them, and was like, okay, there's a blog here, and I'm supposed to be focusing, but I didn't. So there's that. It's that ongoing struggle to discipline myself and not get distracted by just something interesting. But what also sort of influenced my thinking this past week was in reading Nick's book. And he organizes the book around, historical phases of the relationship between indigenous people and colonial forces. And it's just frigging remarkable. It's a great book. But it's remarkable the number of people he articulates and describes who gave their lives for a vision of returning to the way life was before white settlers came and stole their land and stole their way of life and stole their sovereignty. And so when you read about those people, it humbles you. It makes you realize that the challenges we face are insignificant. They're so much smaller, even in the face of climate change. And yet there's an urgency because of climate change. And so there's one of the things that it has caused me to think about is, like, what do we do with the time that we have, and how do we focus our strategy in relation to government in New Mexico? I mean, we're not going to go into international politics or even national politics, but even there, there are options. One of the options is to do what we've been doing, and that is to expose those who are, in our minds, not serving the interests of New Mexico, whether that be the governor, whether it be Representative Lundstrom, whether it be Senator Ivy Soto, it doesn't matter. But, do we do that, continue to expose, or do we try and build relationships? Because the other book that I've been reading this past week is Getting to Yes. And that's about negotiations and how you can get people who don't agree with you to come on board, how you can get them from saying no to saying yes. And so that's been an important part of this exploration over this past week. You're not going to get people to go to yes, I don't think, by lobbing bombs at them, blog bombs, by exposing them. So it's causing a kind of rethinking of strategy, excuse me. And we're going to talk a bit more about that. And that we're running out of time for the radio show. We're going to continue to talk about this and the evolution of Rethink Our Democracy in just after we close this show, and it'll be available by podcast as others have been. I told you I didn't know if I could fill 30 minutes. Now it looks like I'll fill 45. But that's it for today. And I want to thank you for listening and indulging my thinking process, my internal brainstorm that I'm sending out to the public. And we'll be back next week with another show. But in the interim, please stay safe, stay healthy, and stay active. It's the only way we fix this mess. Thank you. We'll be back next week. Bye-bye. Don't forget to listen to the podcast. I've got more to say.